Yep, my name is Mark Bergen. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg and the author of Like, Comment, Subscribe. There's a new book that's out about YouTube, the history of the company and its major moments and decisions, and kind of going inside its operations and why it's such a significant force in the creator economy and like the internet and in all of our lives.
Now, why did you decide to do a book about YouTube of all things?
So I've been writing about Google for a long time, and I'm really interested in Google and how Google works. And I was paying attention to YouTube for a long time. Was a Hollywood story. It was a media story. It was kind of a media underdog, right? And then after 2016, it became this much more complicated, still a Hollywood story, but like a bigger platform and like social media and societal story. And I had started to write some stories. I did a few stories in like 2017, 2018 about YouTube and talking to people there who were at the company for a long time. And they're like, to really understand YouTube, you have to go back and understand like the early days in the Viacom lawsuit and how like so much of the company kind of cut their teeth. There was another turning point where briefly, like one of my best friends is a high school teacher. And he has like, at that point, he had like his kid was like 3 years old, right? He's a Bay Area person, like they don't let their kids watch TV or much YouTube. And I was talking to him about the story I was working on, and I was just talking about PewDiePie. And he was like, I've never heard of PewDiePie, but my high school students are obsessed with PewDiePie, right? Like we went camping in Joshua Tree and all they could talk about was PewDiePie. And then his like 3-year-old son is like singing this song, and they're like, "Where did you hear this song from?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's a YouTube song." And so I just felt like there's this guy who doesn't know anything about technology really or follow the industry, but is really fascinated about why this YouTube influencer is like taking over culture and why his 3-year-old son is singing YouTube songs.
Yeah, interesting. And like, I'd be curious, like, what was the takeaway of like how Viacom and all those lawsuits kind of impacted YouTube, and maybe provide some context too for those who aren't familiar with that, because that's old school.
It's old school. It's really fascinating to go back to. So YouTube was purchased by Google in October of 2006. Which is about 18 months after it started, and a while like pretty early acquisition at the time. And then a few months later, I think it was March of 2007, boom, like $1 billion lawsuit from Viacom, which owns like MTV, like Paramount Pictures. They had like a bunch of movie studios and VH1 and all these cable networks. And Viacom's point was that YouTube was like ripping off pirated footage. And this was, I think there's an argument from some folks that if Google hadn't stepped in and made the acquisition, YouTube may have been sued out of existence, right? Like Viacom was certainly the most aggressive, but a lot of traditional media saw YouTube as a big threat and sort of this like Napster of video in some ways. And YouTube and Google clearly saw it differently. They ended up winning that case in 2010. Which was like a really significant moment, both for YouTube and then I think for like digital media in general, and became this big turning point where like YouTube won not just a case, but it like won culture, right? Like look at the most popular shows on MTV right now. They're basically like the long running show is just like YouTube clips, and Viacom back then they missed. They wanted to buy MySpace. They were like behind the times. They took this strategy of filing a lawsuit and kind of gunning at tech that way instead of competing. And I think it's like clearly history has shown like which side won.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think like Google solved that both with the lawsuit and they solved that with Content ID, which is probably. I spent a little time on this in the book, but like it's probably the most significant product ever, really. Like as far as turning around a business that was like not commercially viable into making it like once Content ID is in place, like YouTube becomes a business that can like work with media and work with record labels and like basically solve. I mean, they have really good lawyers, but like basically solve that copyright problem.
And could you maybe kind of double click in on that for those who aren't familiar with Content ID? Maybe talk about what it is and sort of like why you think it's such a significant moment in YouTube's history, but then also in culture.
Yeah, so it's basically like a fingerprinting technology that's, media companies will upload their material, like a song or a TV show or movie, and YouTube does the scanning based on its back end and can identify when copyrighted material has been posted. And it's since become this incredibly, I think like a lot of YouTubers are experts at this, like really Byzantine process, because you have like different music royalties and like all sorts of layers in it. But it's effectively a way in which like rights owners, media companies, can get have their cake and eat it too, right? Like they can get the marketing potential from YouTube and they can make ad money from it. And so that was YouTube's sell early on, which was a tough sell. Like initially, like even when they had the product kind of fully baked, it wasn't like a bunch of media companies jumped on, right?
Yeah.
They weren't like, oh yeah, of course we'll put our stuff on, and then like anything that we don't upload can also be monetized. Like they were still pretty skeptical of YouTube, but the ones that did come on pretty early, I think you could see that clearly, like they've had a bigger success, and now most of like late night TV is going immediately to YouTube, right? Like SNL, just like think about like all these staples of TV that have in the past decade jumped to YouTube, and in part, and like that commercial relationship and that like really relative ease of the advertising business is because of Content ID.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating how with SNL and the late night shows in particular, like I haven't sat down and watched any of those in forever, but I see them because of the clips. And
it also kind of wild that it wasn't that long ago that was just not a reality. Like I think a lot of people inside YouTube still saw themselves, and I think that's changed recently, but they still saw themselves as the underdog. And like it was this huge achievement when they got traditional media, television and movie studios to come on board. That was their pitch for many years. And it was like this uphill battle, right? To convince studios, to convince networks to come on YouTube.
So what do you think is it must be tough to write a story about a platform. What can you expand maybe on what that arc is? Is it sort of like a hero's journey in a lot of ways, where it's like they're the underdog and now they're the hero of media, or what was it in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, as soon as, I guess so, that got interrupted by basically by like Trump in some ways, right? Like by the Trump era. And so by like the ad apocalypse, right? Like effectively like YouTube built this incredible system. And at the same time as they're like, I think one of the big arcs is sort of like what YouTube wants to be. And I still think there's this big identity crisis, right? Like, I think that, you maybe talk to like the executives there, and they have a very different vision of what creators have and what maybe the average viewers, and partly because YouTube is just so big. It's like, I talked to Hank Green, who's been on YouTube for like since day one, basically. And it's like, what's YouTube? And he's basically like, that's like saying, what's music, right? You just like can't ask that question. In some ways, the book is like, the story is so massive, and I certainly don't claim to like tell the entirety. Like, I kept out, unfortunately, I had to drop a lot of like stuff outside the US, which is really fascinating. But like you've seen growth in India, right? The biggest channels in the world are in India. And you've seen growth in all sorts of markets, but I kept it pretty tight on like what affected I think some of the major decisions in YouTube. And they were, you saw like political crises with content moderation. You saw like some of the bigger creator issues around the ad apocalypse, some of the major issues with kids stuff that they had to deal with and still sort of dealing with. And then some of the like big moments they've had on the creator side, some of the really big struggles they've had, some of the issues that YouTube has faced that like Facebook and Twitter really haven't, around like mass shootings and how to handle like acts of terror. And so like how that stuff, that's important, I think, both for obviously for like bigger political questions and business questions, but it's also like that YouTube is just the platform where you see that have this immediate ramifications for like millions of people who built or trying to build careers on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And we saw that in 2017, right, where it was just like this huge oscillation where overnight, like the ad revenue just disappeared. And I think that's like the big sort of tension in the story and where it goes.
Interesting. Now, the 2016 election and everything, it's interesting. You talk about YouTube. I feel like everybody tends to zero in on Facebook. What role do you see YouTube having played versus Facebook? And also maybe sort of like a second follow-up question, like why doesn't YouTube sort of get the same scrutiny?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think so. YouTube didn't have like a Cambridge Analytica episode that Facebook had, right? Like it didn't have a massive, like really public failure around data sharing and like a tie with the Trump campaign. And to be clear, like part of the reason that YouTube gets less flack than Facebook and Twitter is the Trump just not as big on YouTube. Like when Trump was they've frozen his channel like Facebook did. But when Trump was on there, he didn't have as big of a following and he didn't like do as much there, right? But there's certainly like a lot of political content. YouTube will also often talk about how, relatively speaking, it's small, which is totally true. Like if you look compared to gaming or like beauty or kids stuff, it's tiny. The thing about YouTube is even like small percentages are huge, right? Because the platform is so big. So it did have this profound. I think it still has profound. Like video is a profoundly like emotional and powerful medium. YouTube clearly knows that. Like their advertising business is built around like the power of commercial video messages, right? Like that's why they're so successful as a business, because it's like a really powerful medium. And I think that so a lot of that certainly came up before Trump. You saw them switch to they switched to watch time in 2012, which is a really important moment. And then I think you saw like from that, and I spent a lot of time on this in the book because I think it's really interesting, like the way that the YouTube incentives works, like what kind of determine what type of content is created and what type, not just what's like being recommended, but what type of content's be created.
Yeah.
Right. And so you saw a shift to gaming, you saw a shift to podcasting, vlogging, like stuff that was cheaper to produce longer, basically. And before that, which is this weird sort of now history is coming back. But before that, like a lot of the most successful YouTubers, like Mystery Guitar Man, remember, like minute-long videos that like Joe Penna would spend like weeks on, right? Like making these like kind of mini movies. And it was like the early YouTube culture was a lot more. It was a short form video. It's kind of what people expected from the platform. And it was also like pre-commercial. So like there's a lot of things that were different. But that watch time change is like, I think driven a lot of like where YouTube gets involved in politics is certainly because there's just so much abundant like talking heads on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
To answer your question about why it gets less scrutiny, I think it's because it's part of Google. And Google is bigger, I think is politically savvy. And when Google gets sort of, when Google is talked about and like by regulators and politicians, it's mostly around antitrust. They don't spend as much time on YouTube. Two is just the structure of the product. Like you might go on Facebook and see your like kind of like crazy uncle, or you might see that really personal, like, oh, this, you can go on and it's pretty easy to see, despite the fact that there are filter bubbles on Facebook and Twitter for sure, but you can kind of see it personally. Like, the classic example might be like like a Trumpy. If you support Biden or Democrat, you might see your uncle posting about Trump, and then vice versa. On YouTube, most people don't use YouTube that way. Like there are certainly people that do, but most people use it how-to videos, cooking videos, like basketball clips, like, you name it. Like, and so I think especially that is a major reason why people don't associate YouTube with like the same sort of platform challenges that Facebook and Twitter have, even though they're like totally there.
That's interesting. I think you're right. That personal aspect makes it like you zero in on Facebook so much more. And like, that's where, yeah, sorry, go ahead. If you're thinking about Facebook scrutiny and like politically, most members of Congress are
I don't know, it's like over 50, right? Like, they might be using YouTube. YouTube is it's like TikTok. It's got a much younger user base.
Yeah,
that's probably a contributing factor.
And so you talked with a bunch of creators. Who maybe stands out as sort of of everyone you chatted with as just in general maybe savviest about the ecosystem?
He's not, our conversation's not in the book, and this is an easy answer, but like, our conversation's not in the book, and this is an easy answer, but like, Mr. Beast, Jimmy, like, is like a YouTube savant. Like, and I think some of that is, I think he's like tight with the company. I think he's kind of like he's described himself in interviews too, of like, that he just like will spend all like waking hours thinking and doing YouTube, right? So like, I wonder how long like Jimmy can keep doing that. But I feel like he, what was his trajectory? I heard some stat about it recently.
I mean, he hit 100 million subs.
Yeah, but it was like, 5 years ago, he was like, so I think whatever, like, he's figured something out clearly. I think Hank Green is like and Casey Neistat are like some of the most like articulate thinkers about YouTube, and they've made videos about this. Like Matt Pat, a game theorist, has made some really amazing and interesting videos. Sophia Nygaard is like another YouTuber who's done something really fascinating stuff to like explain how the algorithm works. Something that I hit on a little bit in the book is like, YouTubers understand YouTube way better than the company does. And I think the company's come around to that. Like the sort of running joke inside the company for a long time was like, no one at YouTube watches YouTube. And to a certain extent, that's kind of like, they don't watch YouTube the same way that YouTubers consume so much YouTube. Like they are up, like they watch their fellow creators, they watch the trends, like a lot of the major trends, both sort of the ones that have been like really great, societally great, and like really enriching for all of us, and we love them. The creators spot that first most often, and then creators spotted like the weird superhero kids stuff. Like they've spotted a lot of the like troubling trends where the algorithm seems to be promoting stuff that's like either like full of sort of borderline content, potentially harmful, or just like cheap, and people are like misleading viewers. And I think YouTubers obviously feel like very territorial about that.
Yeah.
So that's I think there's certainly like the ones who spend the most time on the platform like understand it so intimately, and it's like they have to deal with like, it's just constantly changing, right?
100%. Yeah, the superhero kind of kids content was so weird. That was so weird.
A really strange moment, and you can see there was some go back. I did research for the book, and like you find H3H3 did videos about it in like 2016, which was almost a full year before YouTube acted.
Yeah.
So that was like a really good example.
Can you did you could you maybe provide some context of what that was, and then share what you learned about that, if anything, that maybe people don't know about?
Is what YouTubers came up with, and like, you remember these, if anyone remembers, like Spider-Man Elsa was like this really like there was this really fascinating channel called Webs and Tiara that was part of Studio 71, which is a big multi-channel network at the time. And it was anonymous, so no one knew the name of the creator, which was not unusual for kids creators. Like a lot of kids creators were at one point, like you remember there was one called Disney Collector that was like the biggest on YouTube in like 2013, 2014, and no one knew this person was. It was a toy channel. That's changed a lot, obviously. But back at the time, it was like kind of acceptable for big channels to be anonymous. And they did this shtick that was like, it was sort of like cosplay. Like they would dress up with like Spider-Man and Elsa. They'd do like old fashioned timey, like silent movie type stuff. And I talked to Studio, like who work at Studio 7, like people who work with them and made the argument it was like pretty inoffensive, like kind of like Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? Toy Freaks was another big channel that made the exact same argument, like making Bugs Bunny cartoons. And I think if you be generous and say that's true, but like there was this flood of and inside YouTube they call it replicants, which is just like these videos that took the same, almost sometimes the exact same video or like very similar frames, and just like to game the algorithm, and just kept posting it. And so there'd be like a bunch of channels that would post Spider-Man and Elsa for some reason was like the algorithmic sweet spot. And a lot of them were like definitely not things that parents would want their kids to watch. And not things that advertisers, I think more importantly for YouTube, they discovered like once advertisers found this out, they were outraged. And so 2017, if you remember, was the beginning of that year. There was a massive advertiser boycott, which was about a variety of things. And then later in the summer and then the fall, there was another wave of like good reporting in the New York Times, like some YouTubers and some like outsiders spotted this like this mountain of like weird kid stuff. Like YouTube calls it borderline problematic, right? And then
some of it was so odd and creepy.
I mean, a lot of it's been, I'm pretty sure this was YouTube nuked the most channels it's ever done at one point, right? I think it was around November. It was in my book, I had these details. It was like Thanksgiving weekend. So people that were working at YouTube, like one person describes like being at like a family dinner, right, upstairs, like just working the consider weekend, like making sure that, that like they made all these changes and that like they were just guarding against re-uploads. So they like took down like thousands of channels. And so for people at YouTube, it was an incredibly stressful time. And in many ways, this like kids issue was something they just didn't address, and it was building for a really long time. And creators have been pointing it out, and advertisers have been pointing it out too. And I think it just like hit this really like loud period. What's been right after that, if you recall, that was when YouTube made the pretty like seismic decision to increase the threshold about who could be monetized on the platform. So before then, it was pretty much open to anyone. Like as long as you weren't breaking copyright rules or like breaking some of the rules around like graphic content or hate speech, you could get monetized. And then they just like pulled the rug out, and like you had to have a certain number of subscribers and views, right? And that was a really significant change that happened because of this kids crisis. The book actually has some really new details that it got YouTube almost at one point considered pulling all their brand advertising, and because it got so bad. Whoa. Which would have been like a massive change, right? Brand advertising is like the biggest contributor in like a multi-billion-dollar business. So at least that was like something they discussed, but instead they decided to raise the threshold, which, they've invested a lot in advertising stuff on like the software side and the product side, and they've built these relationships with advertisers. So you saw this 2 summers ago in 2020, there was like a big Facebook advertising boycott. And then pretty sure like no advertisers left YouTube. I think that proves that, YouTube, like it was a business crisis. They threw a bunch of resources at it and solved at least that business. But it was like a big existential moment for the company that was mostly driven by like the weirdest kid stuff on the internet.
And did you ever find out who's behind any of these channels?
I did not find out. Webbs and Tiaras, they're in Quebec. They were in Quebec. It's like people who worked at Studio 71 didn't know who they were.
Fascinating.
They was just like went by like, I think it just like had like a pseudonym. I'm trying to remember. They had like a nickname for them. And some of it, some people in the kids world, the rationale is like, they didn't, maybe it was like they had day jobs or something, or they didn't want I totally understand why YouTubers would want to be careful with their identity. But someone else was like, sometimes they were just trying to like smash and grab and like get as much money before like YouTube figured out what was going on. Like the finger family trend, if you remember that one.
I remember that one. What's that one?
Oh, Finger Family was, I mean, you can still look it up. A lot of them are still on YouTube because they're pretty innocent, but they're just like, it was this thing where it was this, you make a nursery rhyme with, and each member of each like finger is a member of the family. And then and then it just, for some reason it exploded. And it was like the biggest thing, like tens of, like massive amount of views. Right. And like people were just they were making like live action Finger Families. Like, it was just things like, why are we making this? I guess because, viewers like young viewers are clicking on this. And then like YouTube just like overnight, like switched off the algorithm basically, where like views were like they were no longer recommending Finger Family videos. And then like all these people that were making it stop. And it's happened same with Superhero, right? There were these like typical like vlogging families. The one, the Orioles, who I think are still pretty big on the platform. They did superhero stuff. They made a video about how they stopped, and they said it was like kind of creepy, but like, people were piling in because that's sort of the history of the platform is like trends happen, especially when monetizations are like, there's this big opportunity there. Like people follow the trends.
Yeah.
And then YouTube will like, it had that, like Minecraft was at some point like huge, right? Like 10 years ago. And then YouTube tweaked its system to like stop promoting Minecraft videos as much. And then traffic on Minecraft was tanked.
Yeah. I heard that, I heard at one point I don't know if this is true or not, but that they blocked Minecraft videos from being promoted to any of like the trending pages, because if that was purely based off of what was like trending or most viewed, it would all be Minecraft.
Yeah, this one. So this is a great rumor on YouTube, and that I did ask. So I actually asked like a senior YouTube engineer about it, because MatPat made a phenomenal video about it, which people should go back and watch. I think it was like in 2015 or something. And like at this point, this was around the time when they were really trying to prioritize daily views. Like they had Susan Wojcicki, the CEO, came in and was like, we were doing really well with like current viewers, like people who are like already on YouTube, monthly active users are like watching YouTube, but they felt like the numbers for like new viewers were like not as high as they wanted. And so in part it was that like, really, I think they looked at the homepage, they looked at like the logged out homepage, which is algorithmic. And they're like, oh my God, it's so much Minecraft, right? And this engineer is like, he's like, I want my mom to come to YouTube. I want my daughter, he's like older mother, like, is she going to really be drawn in by Minecraft? And so there was an attempt to make YouTube more accessible for a broader audience. And so they claimed, at least to me on the record, is that they didn't shut down Minecraft intentionally, but rather it was like around this time when they were trying to shift towards like a broader audience, and like getting people to come on a daily basis is when that's when like the Minecraft crash happened.
Interesting. So, but it does seem like, I mean, even based off of what is confirmed and what you're saying, like they have sort of like put their thumb on the scale around certain content when they felt like it hasn't been good for YouTube overall.
Yeah, I think, YouTube will not say this for like directly. And there's a variety of reasons. One is we talked like Viacom lawsuit, like that entire lawsuit was based on the fact that like, YouTube can't do sort of proactive moderation because if they're knowingly, right, if they know what's copyrighted material, that was the basis of the Viacom lawsuit. And so like a lot of YouTube was like very hands off for legal reasons, for like they didn't want to jeopardize some of their liability protections. And certainly in more recent years, it's become like when like Trump and a lot of Republicans have accused social media platforms of being anti-conservative, like they want to be as like hands off as possible. I think there's also like YouTube and Google wants to do everything at scale, and you can't like their argument there is that you can't make decisions about in particular, like Minecraft was really popular in the US, for instance, but like YouTube is also huge in Indonesia, and like and it's huge in India and in Brazil, and like there's different markets, and a lot of those. This is the rationale from at least people inside YouTube, is like how we can't make these sort of decisions on a daily basis in like dozens of languages and across different countries. That being said, I do like, there was a team, I reported this and it's in the book too, that like called themselves like the trashy video team. And their job was to like build this machine learning classifier to like take trashy videos off the like logged out homepage. And that was like clickbait and like prank videos and like anything that was sort of like maybe like could offend advertisers, or like the sort of like, when they're trying to get them more like the mom and pops, or like more like average people, not just like regular like you like people who are YouTube obsessed to come on. So they have taken times, like, it's like the company sort of MO is to do this like really behind the scenes, and to not be like forthcoming about it. And partially a lot of that is just the culture there at the company. And then a lot of that is they're like super risk averse, especially politically.
Interesting. And just out of curiosity, why didn't the Mr. Beast interview make it into the book?
Oh, really good question. We did a story about it for Bloomberg that was awesome. I think my book is long. It's not too long. It's a quick read, but there's so many. There's only so many stories in there.
Yeah.
I don't have like a good. Maybe he'll come in like the paperback version.
Yeah. What? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think he's he's a super fascinating figure. I don't know what he like. He also like YouTube had him up at their most recent advertising conference, right? Like he's definitely someone that like YouTube is like super happy to promote, and in a way that like, as far as I know, PewDiePie has never been and probably never will be at like and part of that's I think Felix's just personality, but like never will be upstate on the front of the stage at a YouTube event.
Oh yeah, I agree. He's like persona non grata, I think.
Less so now than he was, but yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's just there was in part like Jimmy's got a really inspirational story, but I'm also kind of like the book tackles a little bit of like the drama that happened inside YouTube, and that was some like other creators had like a front row seat to that.
Well, which drama specifically about PewDiePie?
Yeah, PewDiePie was a big part of, he was sort of his incident in 2017 was like what kicked off the adpocalypse. Got it. Yeah. And he was also part of Maker, which was like the book kind of deals with but like the multi-channel networks, right? And Maker was like one of the most sort of interesting and chaotic of like an already pretty crazy like business world, right? Like multi-channel networks. Most people have probably forgotten about them because a lot of them have like either like turned into something else or died. But that was part of like the Wild West era of YouTube's business.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Like, so the middle section of the book is mostly focused on Maker Studios, which sold to Disney. And at one point it was like the early Maker was sort of this vision, which we're seeing now in many. It's like actually getting to it. I think it's ahead of its time. Like the vision was like creators were like own the studio basically, like and then creators were like co-owners of the company. And I think you're seeing that like a little bit like Patreon and a lot of like creator tools that are happening now, and like that Mr. Beast is a perfect example. Like Mr. Beast is a creator who runs like a pretty massive business, and a lot of creators do have like these behind the scenes operations. And I think just the way that like Mr. Beast channel works, you kind of like viewers will see a little bit of that. Like they got to assume like, oh, someone else was involved with like this island, right? Or there's like building this massive set that he builds for each video. And Maker was his early attempt to, at the time, was pretty revolutionary, right? Of like, we don't need producers, we don't need directors, we don't need agents. Like we're going straight to YouTube. And then and early on, like YouTube didn't know what to do with multi-channel networks. Like YouTube didn't know, like there was just this, it kind of came up. A lot of people at Google didn't understand like the talent world. Like early on, I had this great anecdote from like Dan Weinstein, who was at Studio 71, right? And he represented this agent or this YouTuber called The Annoying Orange, which like maybe old school YouTube people will remember. And he's like, he calls up Google, and he's like, I'm the agent for the annoying orange. And they're just like, wait, who are you? Like, what? And like the concept of an agent was like foreign, that like people at Google didn't understand that like they weren't even called creators at this point. Like YouTubers had agents. So multi-channel networks were like convenient for Google at a point. There's a complicated history, but eventually, like within a short span of time, they like no longer became convenient. Like multi-channel networks basically were like, MCNs were like for a few years there, they were like the only way you could get monetized was being on an MCN. And then Google decided for a variety of reasons to like basically like expand that to everybody. And MCNs like kind of lost their monopoly, and they like built out these systems that these like pretty big, just a lot of them were just going for pure scale, and the economics just didn't work very well. And like Maker, I think, has been like pretty much dissolved at Disney, like no longer exists.
Yeah, I think you're right. What is there any particular bit of drama that you feel was particularly fascinating? Because there's so much, and it's like so many layers. There's the businesses like Maker, Fullscreen, the infighting app Maker. There's creator drama. What all of it stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I there can be a whole book about like creator on creator drama. I tend, like, for this one, it's like focused on the company. I think like certainly like Maker is like a really, and I didn't dive in as much as I maybe wish I wanted to, or maybe some readers would like, because the way Maker, like the people involved in Maker and the creators there were like total characters, right? And like very much a lot of them were like very the opposite of like the Google sort of Google approach and Google engineers. I think, one thing that's really interesting, at least from like I think a lot of creators that might want to pick up the book, is like, YouTube was, as most people know, the first platform to pay creators. It basically built this from scratch in 2007, which was a long time ago, and at the time it was like pretty wild, right? And up until now, like TikTok arguably is like doing it, but and Instagram is trying, but really it's still YouTube is like the primary place where people can like build careers, and that's like a incredibly powerful thing that like a lot of creators are really appreciative of. The concept of like YouTube running a creator, like YouTube as a company that supports creators, is very new. Like for its first 10 years, there were like a few people here and there doing that, but like the business team was like get TV and like traditional media on YouTube. Like that was the directive. Like they wanted YouTube to look like TV. And I think, the initial early plans were basically kind of like a Netflix model. They wanted like just to convince the networks to come on. A lot of this goes back to the point of like a little bit of a culture gap, right? Where like people at Google and YouTube didn't like understand creators, and vice versa. But I think, I think YouTubers understood the company a lot better than the other way around. I think it was in 2015, 2014 is when that change happened. You saw those like big advertising campaigns that YouTube made for its creators, putting them on billboards. And then they like pushed into originals. And then they, now they're like pivoting away from originals and moving to shorts. And I think, we talked to enough creators, like YouTube has built out a creator team. It's got much better resources at a time, like a few years ago, right? Like a creator gets like demonetized or loses a channel or some sort of technical issue. It was like impossible to get a human at YouTube. And there are countless stories of that, right? And that still happens for a lot of small creators. And I think YouTube is not set up for small creators to succeed, which is like part of the reason we're seeing TikTok flourish so much. But it's, in some ways we think about YouTube as sort of, it is like, it's been around for a while and it's like the oldest player in this creator economy, but like really, it's been about 7 years now, I think, of them actually like seriously having this business, and it's seen a lot of turmoil in those 7 years. And so I still think like they're trying to figure out what stability looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, my initial, like the Maker stuff was a lot longer. Initially, those chapters, unfortunately, got cut, and like I wanted to do a lot more like Smosh. I mean, that Smosh story, which you lived through, if you talk about it, was still one of my favorite, right? Like,
can you spit it back maybe? And
yeah. I mean, I think this was So Ian and Anthony were living in Sacramento. These is like, early. At one point they were, I don't know how many years, but there was at least several years where they were the most subscribed channel on YouTube, I think, before PewDiePie took them over. And they were big fans of Lonely Island, and like the SNL sketch that was like kind of went on YouTube, like one of the first big viral hits on YouTube. I think it was Ian was working part-time as like Chuck E. Cheese. Like he would get in the costume and like, and they were making these shorts as Shmosh. I forgot when they came on, but they came on super early.
I think they were 2005.
Yeah. And part of this like a really early YouTube community that was, I mean, you talk to people from that era, like it was, there was no expectation of them making money off the platform, right? And in some, like, I think in some ways you see that kind of with TikTok, but I think that moment's already done with TikTok, right? Like there's so much of this, like people know that like creators and influencers can make money. And in fact, that's like the driving motivation a lot of time, right? But like back then that wasn't the motive. Like it was like, they were producing these skits that they loved. They were like trying out new and interesting like film formats. Like some of the earliest Shmosh skits are like, they kind of work as like really, they're like the same sort of creativity that we're seeing in a lot of like the best TikToks right now and the best stuff online. And so they were one of the first, I think it was like Smoothie King gave them, I want to say it was like $15,000. I don't remember the exact amount.
That's what I paid them.
Okay, maybe the Smoothie King was less. Yeah, so they and then they connected with you at an ad agency in San Francisco, right? And did the first branded deal for the now defunct, the like iPod killer, Z-View, right?
Yep. Yeah.
One of like probably I don't know. I can't say definitively if it was like the first sponsored content deal on YouTube, but certainly one of the earliest ones. Weirdly, that company Z-View was like one of the execs there was like Larry Page, who's like founder of Google, his brother. And it was like I think it was like a 3-minute long video called Feet for Hands. And I think they mentioned the Z-View like one time and like appeared on the screen. I mean, they were also one of the initial partners. They were like one of the initial batch. I think it was around 30 in the YouTube partner program in the May of 2007. Like George Stromboulos was the YouTube manager that kind of was spearheaded that. And I remember like there's an anecdote in the book about like George sending out emails to these creators and like hi, I'm George from YouTube, and like half of them didn't reply because they were like, I've never heard from anyone from YouTube, right? And Smosh started to run. They were the first to run ads, and like they told me like when they got ads, like, people in their comment section were like, "You sellouts," right? Like for a long time, Smosh would like not intentionally not run ads on videos.
Oh wow!
Which is crazy to think about now, when you have like the era of like mid-roll ads and like sort of sponsored content in a lot of videos. But yeah, early on. For creators, a lot of creators, they were like, and YouTube itself, YouTube wasn't sure if that model could work. Like it was a really big risk, and like it's interesting to think. Certainly, like YouTube doesn't make those kind of risks now. It's like it was a much smaller, but like Google doesn't either. But at the time, like to go out with that partner program and share revenue with like 30, Ask a Ninja. You remember that? It was like this.
Yeah.
And Philip DeFranco, who's still going at, was part of that. Lonely Girl 15, which was like the biggest YouTube channel at the time. So that was important, and obviously like probably one of the most significant reasons why like YouTube took off the way it did.
Yeah. Now, just to be cognizant of time, do you want to end things with like how? So you wrote this book. Why should people pick it up? Where should they grab it, and where can people find you online? Good.
I like it. You can find the book on Amazon. You can find it on a variety of different, like your local bookstore should have it. bookshop.org if you don't want to, like, there's a bunch of different ways if you'd rather not support Amazon, which I totally understand. And I think like it is I think it's such a, YouTube is this sort of incredibly important and like sort of, like it's a sleeping giant in social media. It has shaped so much of what came after it. Like so much of our era of like Instagram influencers and TikTok and like the creator economy and like the joys and difficulties and like controversies around that, like YouTube dealt with all of it first, right? And now we're seeing a bunch of different platforms go through the same process that YouTube did. And so like, I think it's really interesting to go back and like look at this story and sort of understand how this all unfolded. I think for creators, it's can give a lot of insight into how this company operates, which unless you're like one of the few creators that has like a really tight relationship with the partner manager, executives there, it's really hard to understand what's happening behind the curtain. And I think my book doesn't. I did my best to like really unpack how the company thinks and acts.
Awesome. And real quick, one last time, what's it called again?
Oh, the book's called Like, Comment, Subscribe. You can find it at your local bookstore, anywhere. Follow me on my Twitter blog or something. What do I do?
Yeah, plug everything wherever you want.
Plug everything. I'm at MH Bergen, like the county in Jersey, the street in Brooklyn.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Well, dope. Thanks for doing this. I'm excited to read the book. You had an epic endorsement from Tyler Cowen. Which,
I totally didn't expect that.
I still can't get over like how, like, I mean, how
he also read it. I'm like somewhat skeptical because he like that review was out really fast.
Yeah, it's amazing you got it, dude. I feel like that's a big one.